welcome everyone to the webinar. I know lots of people will still be joining, but I think it's time that we get started. Just to let you know, we will be recording the webinar. If you do have any questions for Matt or the panel, then please put them in the chat box or the Q&A box. And if you are brave, then raise your hand and we can give you permission to speak as well. So we want it to be a super interactive session. Get comfy and over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lucy. Hi, everyone. My name's Matt Stevens. I'm the CEO and founder of Inpulse, employee engagement consultancy. We're very excited by what we do. We work very much in having an amazing platform, but we also work on the consultancy side to really support you and help you through from a strategy and delivery perspective. I'm saying that all very seriously while wearing a Santa hat. For those of you who haven't joined one of our, I think, 18 webinars we've done this year, averaging around about 100 people joining, and something like, again, on this one, I think we had almost 200 signups, which is fantastic. Welcome. It's great to have you with us. My Santa hat is a little nod to try and bring some joy and smiles to your faces as we heard the awful news last night that we're moving into the next phase of COVID restrictions, which is maybe all for the right reasons. But, you know, if you're anything like me, it's like, oh, not again. Here we go. Is Christmas cancelled? Where's this going? So I thought I would wear my Christmas hat to try and bring some cheer today. But firstly, just to add to what Lucy said, really thrilled you've taken the time to be with us this lunchtime. Thank you. I always say that because I mean it. We're all busy people, so I recognize that to give up an hour means a lot, and so a huge thank you. As I said, we had almost 200 people sign up for this, and what will happen at the end is you will get the slides, because people often say to us as they're going through, oh, there's some great content on the slides, will we get them? Yes, you will get them, so don't worry about having to take photos or taking notes. And also, we send out the video of the webinar after, where we're really thrilled to say we have something like 95% of people who signed up actually watch it, for those who haven't been on the first time. So it's a huge amount of engagement in the conversations we're having. And lastly, just to say, really want to reiterate what Lucy said. We really do want interaction. We recognize, we tried a couple of webinars, we said, come on, we'll unmute you and let you talk, and no one did. Everyone got a bit nervous. I totally understand that. So what we do say is please put in the chat or the questions. My job is to keep an eye on that and to bring your views, points of view into the conversation as we're going along. So as I said, very excited today. We are talking about preparing for the future employee engagement. So what do we mean by that? Well, if we go on to the next slide, Dom, really we want to look at a number of areas. We want to refocus engagement in changing circumstances, as if perfectly timed yesterday, just to remind us. I was reading in different media today about, you know, we thought we were living with COVID, then post-COVID, and who knows what it is, but it's still here. And the point stands actually quite strongly on the agenda. What we want to talk about today is these are changing circumstances, and not just COVID, but what COVID has done in terms of sped up some of the digitalization of workplaces, and therefore what's the knock-on when it comes to how we engage our people and connect with them as well, which we're going to look at. And then we want to kind of hopefully get you thought-provoking and cogitating over some of the key factors that are shaping the environment for engagement. So I really hope that I'm certain actually you're going to get some value from some of the things that our panelists, who we're going to introduce in a moment, are going to share with us about some of the big meta trends that you need to be thinking about when it comes to engagement. And they can seem a bit up here, but actually I get to spend a lot of time in boardrooms, and I know that's what they're interested in. Like, what are the big trends coming that are going to affect how we engage and lead our people well over the next few years? And we'll be talking about that. And of course, always questions and comments, please do keep them coming as we go through. We will keep an eye on that, as I said. But with all of that said, I'm going to hand over to Dominic Walters, who's our Director of Consulting for Inpulse, to introduce the panel and take us forward.
Thank you very much, Matt. Well, yeah, I'm Dominic Walters, Director of Consulting. My job is to help work with clients around using the platform, but also to tackle the issues that come out of it. So lots involved around strategy and leadership development, leadership coaching as well. But we're also joined by Jen and Kat. So Jen, can I pass over to you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dom. So as I'm Jen, so I am the Chief Exec of the Institute of Internal Communication. So we're the professional body that exists solely focused on internal communication, representing around about 2,000 members, largely in the UK, but with everything COVID, a growing international base as well.
Thank you very much. And Kat.
Morning, everybody, or afternoon, everybody. So my name is Catherine Barnard, and I'm a partner and co-founder at Working the Future. We provide future of work trend intelligence to organisations to help business leaders understand how work is changing, what things are going to have most impact on the way in which business gets done in the 2020s. So as you'd imagine, we are very, very busy at the moment.
Thank you both. And I think we'll come on to this in a bit, but one of the great reasons for getting everyone involved in this session is because Jen and Kat have been involved in the podcast. I've been involved with it too, which is looking at some of the issues around communication and engagement in the future of work. But more of that in a second. But we thought it would be useful really to look at what we mean by employee engagement. It's a question we get asked so much. And different organizations approach it in different ways. So we thought, look, first of all, let's look at how different organizations involved in engagement have described it. So we took Investopedia, the biggest financial information website and dictionary around business, Deloitte, and Engage for Success. And what we thought was interesting, I won't read them all out, but what we thought was interesting was the emphasis that different organizations gave. So Investopedia talk about engaged employees care about their work. They really focus on that. Deloitte talk about discretionary effort, that bit, if you like, that we really don't have to do in order to do our job, but when we bring it, it makes a massive difference to our effectiveness and to the organization. And then Engage for Success, talk about the right conditions for people to be the best every day. So there are lots of other different definitions. We could have gone on for a long time with this slide, but it shows, just taking three of them, that different organizations focus on different things. I think what that shows us is that there isn't really any one definition around engagement. It varies. But if you do boil it down, these are the key things that come out. So when people are equipped, enabled, and really inspired to be their best selves at work. And to be honest, as an organization for Impulse, when we get asked what our definition of engagement is, that's what we normally talk about. And obviously then how that looks and what good looks like is different to different organizations. But if you're pushed, then I suppose if you look at all the different definitions, there are some key trends that come out. Firstly, people need to be clear on what they're doing. They want to feel as though they've got a purpose in life, that it's not just about coming to work to make money, they're doing something that's useful. They've got to be part of the process. And this is something that organizations are looking increasingly at over the last year and beyond, is are they more valued, are they included as well? I think a lot of people want an opportunity to develop. And the bit that often gets forgotten and has got forgotten, I think, in the last 18 months is it's really important to enjoy what you're doing as well. And that can be hard when you're up against it and lots of things are changing. And I noticed one or two internal communicators on LinkedIn saying, oh my goodness, here we go again last night, because we're having to communicate a whole new range of constraints and constrictions. But even in that sort of circumstance, it's important to be able to enjoy your work. But the key point for this session is that there isn't any one boilerplate definition around employee engagement. It depends upon every organization. And that in turn depends on what's important for that organization. So we were with a client yesterday that wants to shift so that they encourage much more around innovation. And that means people need to feel as though they're going to be listened to, that their ideas are taken seriously and they're valued. So they wanted to change their definition of engagement to include that. But it also changes around the climate that we're working in. And that's one of the things we want to touch on. And certainly what I know we're going to hear from Jen and Kat about in terms of what we need to think about in the future. So I think we're saying, look, engagement depends upon different organizations.
Dom, sorry, just a couple of quick things I want to add to that, because it's a really important point. I really want everyone to hear this, because this is particularly from an Impulse perspective. When we go in and we work with people and we're surveying people to see how engaged they are, we would always say, if I could sum up that slide, and for everyone just listening, is context matters, right? So, if you're with a company who's got a really big growth strategy, who's trying to employ lots of new people, versus a company who's right sizing, as they like to say, or basically downsizing, and on a bit of consolidation, actually that context matters when it comes to how you engage with people. And then really what you've done here is there's some input when it comes to engagement, and there's some output. And the output is, higher productivity, greater discretionary effort. People tend to stay longer with the organization. But the input is, as you're saying, actually, what's your relationship like with your line manager? Do you have a sense of the type of work you're doing and you can understand it and want to get on with it. So if just to help everyone, for me, and we meet with clients, we talk about context, then what's the input and what's the output. And as you've rightly said, I mean, we could talk all day on the different definitions because there is no kind of standard, here's what it is. But for us, it's very contextual, and that's important. Or another word that we're starting to bring in more and more is personalized, that I'm sure we'll come on to later. And recognize there's some input stuff. So, you know, as I said, you know, how you get on with your line manager, do you have a sense of purpose in the organization? Is there opportunity to develop, but also then the output that you get from that, which is affect in a way some of what we're measuring. So I've got people walking by my window looking at me like this. Sorry, just distracting me. Anyway, carry on, sorry.
I think the other aspect too, which we sometimes see people, organizations forgetting, is engagement on its own is not enough. It's what you're engaged in. And you may be familiar with David McLeod, Chris Brady's model, which illustrates this, which we find really, really helpful. But you say, look, you can be highly engaged in something, but not know what it is you're supposed to be doing. These are the headless chickens. And they get frustrated very quickly and often find they expend energy and resources in things they don't really need to. So we need to move people from that. We've got the other end of the continuum, which is people who are very clear what you want them to do, but don't fancy doing it. They're the tin soldiers. And clearly they're a problem themselves. And hopefully not many, but all organizations have bookends who are neither sure of what it is you want to do, but even if they were, they couldn't really be able to do it. So we want to get people up to that top right-hand box, the high flyers, people who are very engaged and they're very clear on where they should be focused that engagement as well. So that's the other aspect of when we're helping organizations define what engagement is. What do you want people to be engaged in? So we thought we'd share three. I'm not going to go through all the different words here. We've worked with, these are three clients we worked with recently who have realigned and changed their definition of employee engagement, driven by what their organization needs to do. So the top one is a public service organization. So in the public sector, and you can see that their big issue is, do people feel able to speak up? They want people to question, to challenge when things aren't working. They want to improve their service. And they see the way of doing that is by making people encouraging people to raise issues and spot stuff. And that means they need to be comfortable and feel they're listened to. So you can see engagement for them, those top 3 or 4 bullet points are all around being able to ask questions and being listened to. The second example comes from a higher educational establishment. And for them, because they, like all higher educational establishments, have been through a really tough 2 years when they've had to teach many of their people online, learn new crafts, that they haven't necessarily got that sense of community. And so they're very keen, as part of their engagement, to establish that sense of belonging within an organization. So you can see their definition is about being proud, belonging, and then because of that connection, I feel as though I can be the best I can be. And then the final example is a tech company that's really keen to expand innovation. They want to create new markets, to find new clients. And that means using the fantastic abilities they've got in a new, different way. So you can see that their focus is very much on how can I support each other? Do I feel valued? How do I make a difference for our customers? They really want to emphasize in their definition of engagement that they want to untap people's reserves and abilities as well. So 3 examples of recent work we've done. Obviously, they've been anonymized, but to show you how different organizations would change their definition of engagement according to what's important to them as an organization. The other aspect, and this is where I'm leading into what Kat and Jen will talk about, is the climate is shifting in which every organization needs to refine its employee engagement. And there are 3 things really that we're focused on here. One is people have been talking about the Great Resignation, or I read in America, the Great Retirement, but where the shift in power has been from employers to employees. And I'm sure you're familiar with the stats, but the CBI is saying there are going to be shortages in the UK for at least 2 years. We've got a very, very low unemployment rate. I mean, well into the full employment category. There are lots of job vacancies, more now than for 20 odd years. And it's not just in the US. I know many people on this call will have interest in the US as well, and beyond. But the US had its highest record number of people quitting in September. So people are moving. It's shifting the power from employers to employees. They can no longer assume that people will stick around. The second thing is, and I know had webinars on this subject, focused on this subject exclusively, Generation Z. So that population coming through now into the workforce in their 20s, but really big definition. So interesting enough, many of them are conflicted. So if you look back over the surveys we've run, people in that category, 3/4 of them Enthusiastic, that's great, there's lots of energy there, but that enthusiasm has been worn away by anxiety. And anxiety is about job security, about the future, about what sort of work they're going to be doing in the future. The flip side is they've got much greater expectations. They're demanding flexibility, and that's been increased by the pandemic and all that's gone around that as well. They want better work-life balance. But it's also interesting, they don't trust implicitly. I think previous generations, and it's probably been worn away over the years, have trusted leaders because of where they are. And that's something that Generation Z do not do. They want to hold their leaders to account. They want to have a clear purpose. They won't do things just because they're told to. They'll do it because they believe in the leader, they believe what they're doing.
Sorry, I'm just going to say the way sometimes we refer to that is the age of deference is definitely over. And so when they're coming into the workplace, there is no natural deference that maybe touching the millennials, not much, but certainly my generation would have expected to have had more of that in us, and that does then impact how you engage them and what engages them.
Sure. And then the third element is one that's we're starting to see creeping back in, really. So last year there was a big focus on well-being, and even in the early part of this year. And I guess as the restrictions eased, maybe people started to get back into a more familiar pattern of working. The focus on well-being has become less, but from what we've seen and the comments we've seen in surveys and the conversations we've had, we realise it's still there very much as an issue. And I borrowed from, Kat has been doing some work on this, but looking at Fortune, I think, Fortune magazine, and found that, look, over the past year, a quarter of UK employees feels that they've hit a psychological breaking point. And that's quite a stark figure, where people are saying, hang on a minute, I've got to a point where I've asked myself some serious questions about my work and my lifestyle and me. And then what we also found was quite staggering was this: over half feel pressure to disguise any difficulties they've got from their colleagues, particularly around the stresses of the pandemic. And one can only assume that's going to increase with the announcements we've had in the last 48 hours. And that led, I think, Kat, to this idea about presenteeism, which is a fantastic phrase, but it's people putting on a front. Again, people behaving and presenting in a way that's very different from how they're feeling. And I think that's a really important issue for anybody around engagement, is how do we get people in a position where they feel comfortable to open up about how they're feeling and what's going on. And we got to that position probably towards the end of 2020. I think we've moved away from it over the last year, and it's something we now need to reconsider. How can we get people to be open about their issues that affect them?
And Dom, sorry, just two quick things, and then I know we're going to pass over to Kat and Jen. But I think it's really important to say for everyone listening again, so what practically how does this impact the future? There's a well-being debt that will need to be paid off at some point in organisations. And I think that's something that we're asking our clients to give some thought to, as we do too for them, around how do you pay down the debt? Because everyone's carrying a debt in terms of their well-being that we've kind of gone through these 18, 24 months that are quite psychologically challenging for everyone, regardless of their circumstances, because it's been so different to normal life. And so that does have impact, and it'd be remiss of me to say, as the founder of Inpulse, therefore that's why for us it's highly important that you're also measuring how they feel and why, so you can really track the emotional impact and the emotional experience they're having and the emotional well-being that's going on at work and outside of work too. So
okay, thanks Matt. So look, I think what have we said, this is about the future of engagement. And so we've looked just now at say, look, engagement's not one thing. It depends upon the organisation and the organisation's circumstances. And we've talked a bit about how organisations have adapted because of the changes in circumstances inside, and we've looked at some of the external ones. But now it'd be great to hand over to Kat and Jen to look in more detail at some of the factors that are going to shaping engagement in the coming years. So, I'm sorry, I missed my last slide. Sorry, just bring all that together. We found that 13% of our employees basically saying they're going to leave their organisations. And that ties in very closely with Monster and Glassdoor. If you look at the turnover rates they're reporting as well. So I think what this all shows us is that people are prepared to leave if they're not getting what they need from their organisation. So it gives us even more impetus to do it. Now, Kat and Jen, after that false start, let me bring you back in and pass over to you, please.
Okie doke. Jen, how do you want to do this? Do you want to just do a really quick introduction? So how we've come to be here today, Over to you, Jen.
Yeah, so just to say, because obviously I'm here representing obviously the Institute of Internal Communication, and Kat and I know Dom as well. We've worked together as that future of work trends expert as well, to kind of marry up, well, if this is the future of work and these are the things that are happening, what is the future of internal communication in that context? And I think it's important to say at IOIC as well, what we say is internal communication is one of the drivers of engagement. It is not one. So we're going to focus on how can internal communication adapt in that future scenarios that we've talked about to help combat or help address some of those kind of engagement issues that Don so clearly defined. And one of the things that we did is, as part of that, is myself and Kat, we actually started chatting pre-COVID, which I know feels like a very distant memory that there was ever a life pre-COVID, but I believe there was once. And at that point, we were sort of really looking at the macro trends that were happening in the future of work, from acceleration of digitalization, the acceleration of the gig economy, and all that, the changing labor market. And then we had a pandemic hit, and that saw some of those trends shift, but just largely actually accelerate significantly on the backdrop of that. So then myself and Kat sort of came together and going, well, let's try and interpret, if those are the macro trends, what does that mean for internal communication? We've done loads of work on that. And then we thought we need to really talk about these. Hence, then we have a new podcast series where really we're picking apart some of those macro trends and actually thinking, what does that mean for the future of internal communication? Would that be fair, Kat, as a descriptor?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. We were having that exploration. The pandemic has just been this massive accelerant for the future of work, and I'm sure that everybody that is listening in right now would agree that, to a large extent, our worlds have been turned upside down. And I nod to what you've said there, Jen, about, internal comms being a strand of engagement. I think for me, if I was to look back on my entire career, I would say that communication is kind of the glue that holds organizations together. And as we shift into ever more distributed, non-locational ways of working, then it absolutely sits as the bedrock that underpins our engagement and how we come together to achieve great things. So when we were preparing for the webinar, Dom and Matt asked us to think about some key things, key trends that were transforming internal comms. And to be fair, it's a little bit cheeky, but we did actually riff off some work that we'd done for a global brand just, was it October? So this deck that I'm going to run through super quickly with you is just a quick synopsis of our thoughts backed up by some data that is sat out there in the public domain, and hopefully just give you some food for thought in terms of what these trends mean for us as co-workers, for us as people who show up every day and try to deliver our best work. So Dom, if you want to flip through the slides, I'll run through them quickly and then we'll just have a really quick compliment. Okay, so the first trend, which was playing out well before we'd even ever heard of Wuhan or COVID, is the impact of technology on our workplaces. And, the technology industry now is vast and growing on a daily basis. But what the combination of technology and globalization, we've ended up in a place where we've got this hyper-connected world where anybody at any point on the planet can effectively spin up a business that acts as a competitor somewhere in the business ecosystem and has some kind of impact. And this is a compelling piece of data for us that people with smartphones, you've got no idea, as more and more people join the online world, that reshapes and remodels how business gets done, which has massive ramifications for all of us wherever we are in the world. So that was one point. Also, if you move on to the next slide, Dom, thank you. We've all heard about it. I think we're all kind of waiting to see exactly what the true impact will be. But developments in artificial intelligence fundamentally reshape how we work, because obviously artificial intelligence is a technology that can do the work of humans and that can do it far more effectively, and so on and so forth. So we've got a massive reshaping of the labour market, if you will, in play at the moment, and it doesn't seem to show any signs of relenting. In fact, I'd argue that the labour market will be further transformed by AI, because bluntly, all of us being working in a distributed fashion, there will be aspects of the work that gets done by organizations that can be picked up by technology. So there's a whole reshaping and shifting of work there. And as you can see on the slide, PwC, and I think they came up with this data point in about 2018. So it preceded the pandemic. I should imagine that 15.7 trillion US dollars that's on screen there has actually been augmented now by the impact of the pandemic and the extent to which organizations are looking at using technology to replace humans to become more efficient and effective. But either way, whether or not humans get replaced by technology, what it leaves is this fundamental requirement within organizations to reskill and upskill. And actually, I'd imagine everybody that's tuned in right now, we've all had to get to grips with new tools and platforms over the last 3 to 5 years. One of the things that's interesting, and I don't know whether you would agree with me, maybe I'm the least techie person in the room, but I feel like there's just so many tools and platforms that we're using all the time now that effectively we've only got like a minimum viable efficacy. We're kind of just basically using the bare minimum to get the job done. We're not optimizing these tools. We're not able to use them to their true level of potential because there's too many to choose from. Like, we could literally be here all day, every day, learning how to use the tools. And of course, when you've got more tools coming online, if you think, for instance, in the field of engagement, actually 10 years ago, who was paying attention in detail to employee engagement? And then look today, how many tools and techniques and platforms and what have you fill that space. So, and that's only going to increase as well, because the money in the economic system is getting poured into technology and technology innovation. So,
and Pat, just on that point, in our survey, it's really interesting. We see two challenges for companies this year. One is systems and processes really disengage people, where the systems aren't good enough and the processes get in the way of people delivering their job, often because the system isn't useful to what they need. And the second one is, do you have the tools to do your job? What's really interesting we're seeing is companies understandably are coalescing around, say, is there one provider who can do it all our sort of HR people-y stuff. But the downside of that is they miss out on all the innovation because the smaller ones, and I'm not even thinking of, but I'm thinking of lots of different areas and sectors who are very challenging. Think of like Revolt, Splitwise, Lenvo against Barclays, HSBC. So you go, great news, everyone, we're doing all our banking through HSBC. And everyone goes, yeah, but it's so slow. I can't do international payments without paying. And it's the same when it comes to people's tools in the workplace. It's like, so I can see companies, I wanted to add to that, because I can see companies going, we need to just get the Microsoft for everything. We just need to get the SAP for everything. We'll do everything on that. But their innovation is really quite poor.
The other thing I would just add to that as well is that from an internal communication point of view, what this is doing is making us be channel-led, not people-led.
Yeah,
in terms of the decisions and the way that we're thinking about things, because there feels such an overwhelming urgency and pace to keep up with technology and implement it at speed. But to what end? To what purpose? for what need. And we're doing that at such a pace that we're thinking that first, then go, well, the people will come with us afterwards. I feel there's a need to flip that around, because technology feels so overwhelming. We should be doing it. It's the modern way. But are we really thinking it through enough? And I think that we are sometimes need to be not channel first, people first.
And on that point, and I know we're going slightly off piste and away from the deck, but let me just, because I think this is a really important point, all too often organizations, and this is the dichotomy that we have right now, which is we are at the end of employer-led markets, and we need to just deal with that and move on. All too often, and it's interesting what you say there, Matt, organizations and enterprises take a view on technology and think, right, let's get all our eggs in one basket, let's get that economy of scale, let's beat down the supplier, when it comes to the procurement process and so on and so forth. But actually what we saw in the 2010s was the rise of bring your own device, and now it's bring your own anything. So actually there's a trend in technology, whereas 10 years ago, the IT team would say, right, everyone use Blackberries. Do you remember those Blackberries? and people started coming in with their newfangled iPhones because they were way cool back in 2010. And that kind of led to the advent of this BYOD, bring your own device kind of phenomenon. But actually now that applies to anything and everything. And particularly Gen Z, they do want to bring their own tools and platforms to work. So if they identify something that they perceive to be funky, they want to be able to use that regardless of any constraints that the IT department might place upon them. And also, and there's one to think about, regardless of whether or not that tool is actually enterprise fit. So there's an educational piece there, for sure, but there is this whole piece, and look at the rise of TikTok. People as individuals are mass adopting new tools and platforms, and actually the enterprise has to catch up with that.
So let me just, sorry, I just have to bring this to life because it's perfect what you say. Work with the company, mainly frontline employees, and this employer-led market's over. Just for everyone listening, that was a critical point Kat made. So don't miss that value bomb that was offered, because as people who are thinking about how to engage, little story to bring that to life. Bunch of their employees started using WhatsApp, not that advanced, but they were using WhatsApp to do all their communication and share whatever. So the company went, well, yeah, that's great, but we're not on that and we can't control it. So we're going to bring Slack in. So great news, everyone. We're going to have Slack. You can get it on your phone. You can use it. What was the take up? 0. And what was the issue behind it? Was they were still looking for control, because they were like, well, it should be employer led. So as long as we have the control, it was like, no, just let it, you join in, let it happen. It's working really well. They're communicating and sharing, just not necessarily on your tool.
And I think there's another example in internal comms, just to pick up on that point as well, Matt, in terms of particularly in the height of the pandemic. One organisation, and he's been on record in saying this, big steel manufacturer who's very much around, so the biggest employer in the whole community. So it's about actually serving it. And when everyone went to furlough, well, you couldn't use those tools. You were not allowed to use those tools to communicate because that's anti-furlough. But you still need to keep those people engaged and informed and up to it. They made a very brave, and you have to look, well, where do they go? What works for them rather than what the business needs, and they used Facebook. So they made a very bold decision to pay a public channel on Facebook and share internal content that was leaked. But actually, the way that engendered trust, openness, transparency, and actually, in effect, actually helps their whole profile in that community as well on a public domain. But businesses are worried about that employer-led control, and it's a very scary place for them to be.
Okay, well, I think we talk about technology. As someone who's just reeling from the fact apparently that Blackberries are no longer trendy, let's move on to number 2, please, which is
Dom, bless you.
Changing attitudes to work. Tell us about that, Kat.
That was for all the over 60s on the webinar. That was a little one for you there, everyone.
I was going to say, we've got an iPhone 6 for sale if you want it, Dom.
I'm going to ignore this casual ageism and let's move on to look at.
So moving on quickly, changing attitudes towards work, and Matt and Dom nodded to this earlier. We cannot underestimate the extent to which people have very, very different attitudes towards work in the 2020s. this data point produced by KPMG feels really long in the tooth now. I would imagine that 3 years has been cut in half again, if not, you know, if not even more. And I think, you know, the simple point is that people are no longer prepared to tolerate a mediocre experience. We look at the rise of the experience economy. People want to feel something, don't they, when they come to work? You know, given the amount of time that we spend at work during the week, we want it to count for something. We want to feel inspired and motivated and all of those things that you guys in the engagement community completely know about. And it feels to me that there's this kind of talk is cheap kind of thing going on, because it's, again, you know, employers need to wake up and understand that we are at the end of this excuse me, employer-led market. And I know Matt, when we were preparing for this call, we were talking about the kind of hyper personalization of work now, which sounds and is difficult because it involves engaging with and communicating with everybody in that ecosystem. But I'm not convinced there's an alternative to it.
No, and just to bring that to life again, and I'll let you carry onwards. 5 years ago, Dom, do you remember we were talking with one of Ireland's largest banks, and the senior person there in HR or people team really wanted to personalize reward and recognition. And the organization was like, well, hang on, we've got kind of a process and we've got a system, and isn't that personalized enough? And this person was saying, no, not at all. Like, that's still within your construct of how they should spend their money based on this small platform they'd used. And he was like, what if they just want actually someone to stand up in front of the whole office and say, well done? Or what if they want the complete opposite and they just want a quiet word with the CEO to say, well done, whatever it was. And so here we are 5 years later. And I think it is going to take corporates a while to catch up on this, but there is no doubt managers, and unfortunately it is going to fall a little bit on managers, are going to have to personalize how they engage with employees in a much more obvious way than they have been.
I think I'm saying that as well. We did some work on the employee experience piece as well last year, and we looked at actually what the main things that actually make people feel that the experience isn't great. It's recognition, and it's not necessarily financial. It's thank you. It's emotional. It's considered. It's talking about it. And actually, those are the things that actually sometimes, if you think about it and you encourage, can be easier to do, but they get subsumed or pushed down the list by other perhaps priorities as well.
I've just got a quick time point. We've got about 5-10 more minutes presentation, and give us time for questions as well. So I'm going to pass back to Kat, if I may.
I'm racing through, Dom. I'm racing through.
You're doing a great job.
So this data point from Gallup, I think, you know, I'm not going to read that out, but it for me, it reinforces, you know, having somebody there that sees me, hears me, understands me, and is invested in my best interests. You know, all too often we've either experienced for ourselves or we've had conversations with friends who've talked about, you know, being at work and just feeling like a cog in a machine, and none of us want to feel that. We know, all of us know that we have gifts to offer, that you know, given the right dynamics, we could do better than we do today. So I think, you know, we're waking up to that. I think the internet has transformed what we feel we could be. That's a really interesting point. And so there's another point, I think, final slide on this changing attitudes. This comes back to something that I can't remember whether it was Dom or Matt said earlier about, you know, we have this, and perhaps even we were talking about it before we came live, where we thought we were talking about the government. You know, trust is massive now. We have this massive erosion of trust actually in society that has emanated, well, it was obviously there pre-2016, but Brexit has caused a massive conflict. Who we ally with politically now seems to be causing massive conflict. And of course, you know, how we feel about the pandemic and whether or not we want to wear masks, whether or not we want to get vaccinated, you know, we're kind of polarized, and it's eroding our capacity to communicate together effectively. And over and above all of that, we expect our leaders and our organizations to represent a force for good in the world. And if we feel like they're not doing that, then that will be absolutely exacerbating this drive to go and look for something new. And I know that you guys had nodded to this in an earlier slide. Actually, there's some interesting data that came out of Deloitte. Deloitte do an annual millennial and now Gen Z survey. And I think that whole point about pleasanteeism cannot be understated. I think, 20 months in, we're all still massively struggling with the toing and froing of the pandemic, but we've lost the will to talk about it because we sound boring when we talk about it. I know Jen and I regularly have little conversations about just how draining this situation is. Yeah. But if you're not in a safe, trusted environment, then of course you're not going to talk about just how mentally exhausting it is. And I think that, again, what's driving this big resignation is the extent to which people feel that they've been supported or not with their well-being. And actually, there's a couple of things going on in the labour market at the moment. Yes, there's lots and lots of people leaving, but you have to also think within your organisation. You may have people leaving through one door, but you've also got people coming in through the other. And unless you come back and revisit the whole topic of mental health and burnout, basically, and keep focused on that, I suspect your organization will experience some kind of dead cat bounce, which is that the people that have come to you thinking that your setting is going to be better than what they've just left behind realize that your setting isn't that much better because you're not talking about these things that are continuing to impact all of us.
Okay. And tell us about the attention deficit.
Right, very, very quickly. So the final piece in terms of how we engage and how we communicate within our work environments, we cannot underestimate the extent to which the internet, and particularly mobile internet, has reduced our attention spans. We are constantly looking at our devices, responding to pings and dings and vibrations and so on and so forth. And so on the one hand, our productivity has been inhibited by these continuous disruptions. We don't have time to listen to another broadcast message or respond to another survey or so on and so forth, because we're constantly running from behind with this never-ending pile of emails that are still unread and so on. So there's a whole bunch of data that is really interesting to track if you've got the attention for it around the whole topic of attention deficit. There's another quote in here. Wow, that really kind of makes me sit up and listen all day long. So James Williams was actually a key player in the early days of, I want to say, Google. And I think he may have been responsible for designing the whole kind of Google Gmail interface. So he's got insider knowledge, and he basically kind of saw what was going on and left Google. And I think he works as chief ethicist or something. He's affiliated to the University of Oxford. He's worth listening to.
What a great thing about attention becoming a scarce resource. Who would have thought that? Organizations need to manage and marshal people's attention. That's
well, I think actually I would go further than that. I think as human beings, we all need to manage and marshal our own attention. And the sooner that we become aware of the fact that we're living in thrall to these Silicon Valley organizations whose job it is to distract us and keep us on their platforms, then we kind of recapture our own lives, but just being mindful of that in the context of engagement and internal comms. You know, we have to, I think it's important that if to do our best work, we have to be mindful of the impact that attention deficit is having on all of our colleagues.
The other thing as well, I would say on that point, from an internal comms point of view, a lot of members I'm speaking to or professionals I'm speaking to is what we're feeling overwhelmed by, because I think pace is a challenge as well, is that a lot of our stakeholders go, well, I just need this comm out, I need this comms out, I need this comms out. And so it's just going, and it's just constantly going out and out and out, and we're not stopping to kind of go, but why? To what end? And there's a real need to re-educate, I think, in leadership and stakeholders around commsing it, because it just ticks it off my things to do when you're just going to feed into that noise, which then feeds into attention deficit, exhaustion, overwhelmed, well-being, a pinging. So we must treat that volume of communication with more care.
And demonstrate to people the fact that if they do that, it's going to have no impact at all.
Yeah.
But it'd be great just to actually pulling together here. So Kat, we've covered a lot of great stuff. So what are the key things to take, and what does this mean for us in terms of engagement?
Well, so obviously, as you can see on the screen there, you know, the future of work is highly likely to be a lot of things, but without a doubt, it's going to be hyper-connected, hyper-transparent. We are all living in a goldfish bowl, and the leaders of our country might be minded to remember that. Sorry, had to get it in there. And hyper-disruptive, you know, we're constantly dealing with change now. So the pace and the nature of the work that we do is never going to be as slow as it is today, alarmingly. So the sooner we're acceptant of that, the better. And then what does it mean, in my humble opinion, in our humble opinion, for the future of engagement? I think that we have come such a long way in 10 years. We now have, you know, dashboard data to feed us the sentiment of the mood in the room, if you will, but actually, back to the earlier point, you know, the future of engagement has to be customized, has to be tailored to each colleague. And I've used the word colleague because actually I think we need to shift away from employee engagement. There's good reason to believe that by the end of this decade, more than half the workforce will be self-employed. And at the moment, as far as I can see, we have little or no engagement strategy for people that are off payroll, for people that are contractors, consultants, all the non-PAYE elements of the workforce that enable work to get done. We've got to start including more people in the organizational narrative. And to the points that we raised earlier, I mean, the WhatsApp, Slack, that was interesting story that Matt shared. And we have to be, you know, attentive to the detail. Context is key. And to my mind, you can't understand the context until you're prepared to really listen to the stories that people will share with you if you ask them to share, and if you ask them the right questions, you know, because the other thing that I think is how I feel about my work today could be completely different to how I feel about it yesterday, because yesterday was the day that, you know, my cat, I don't know, pooed outside of the litter tray, and I had an argument with my husband, and when I got home I found that the heating hadn't turned on. You know, everything changes for us all day long, and we are such complex emotional creatures. We always have been, but I think pandemic times kind of amplifies that as well.
Yeah, I think just to add a couple of things on there, because I thank you both of you, because it was really challenging, interesting, thought-provoking content, so really appreciate that. Couple of little add-ons to that. What we found through measuring emotion over the last 5 years is there's like a majorative view and in the moment view. Totally agree. And when because we went out and did a bit of work to go, what, you know, when people are answering how do you feel about working at or whatever company, do they ask it in the moment, which is exactly as you described, just had an argument with my partner, the cat's thrown up, you know, the traffic was pretty awful, or are they answering the majorative, which is I can step back and kind of go, and that's the complexity of humans, totally. And we actually found about 98% of people were answering it in the majorative. You know, generally, as I think about working here, this is how I feel at this time, versus about 2% who were answering it in the. The other thing I just said about that I think it's such a powerful point about we're going to have to think, and this is we're talking meta trends here, but we're going to have to think more very differently on how we put the team together, because the team isn't necessarily all PAYE now. And another tiny little anecdote. A friend of mine, they've building an app, got 40 million investment, so it's scaling really fast. You know, all the right people are involved here in the UK. And literally last night, he said to me, we've just interviewed 5 people the day before. 3 came out the next day saying, we're going independent. Are you interested or not? So it's real world. This is happening right now. People are saying, actually, I don't want to join the organization, but I'm going to be independent, but do you still want to work with me? And I think organizations are going to have to start thinking about that. And I'm hoping everyone listening will start to almost take some of these trends back to their organizations to consider. We've got 2 questions. I'm really keen, or one more a comment on the second question. Sarah said, ageism in the workplace really gets in the way of organization transformation. As does any level of discrimination. Why is casual ageism and sexism still okay? Banter. Sarah, apologies if I've offended anyone with I think that was maybe a reference to my banter with Dom. Forgive me, that's 10 years of Dom and I bantering about his inability to work well with technology. So
you comment on my competence, not my age.
Yeah, no, but I did make a comment to that. So that's apologies on that. Alex has said, and I'll go to Jen first. That's right. On the back of this discussion, the rise of Zoom towns support a hybrid working strategy. Leaders need to embrace this as part of their understanding of employee desires. Are you seeing this shift in organizations as an easy or difficult transition? And is this predominantly employee-led?
Just so I understand that question, is it talking about are organizations taking employee desires into play when they're thinking about the hybrid futures that they're designing?
I think so, and particularly with the Zoom towns as an example.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that with the organizations you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that hybrid working in internal comms is obviously a huge discussion at the moment, and lots of things. And I think there's also a need to understand what we mean by hybrid working. And I think that we've got another terminology mess. It's whether or not are we moving to flexible working, and hybrid is just a mechanism by which we work. So some people are physical and some people are virtual. That's what hybrid is, the meeting of 2 designs. Our organizations, I think that I think it varies. Some have done a better job than others. I think there's lots of organizations that have done much more around the trust dynamic and been like, work where you want to, how you want to, when you want to, because they know if you're thinking about the employee-led market, then that's really important. If you look at any job spec out there at the moment or job ad, it's flexible. So I think that that's been really good. I think that there's other organizations that are trying to mandate hybrid working, and that just gets an absolute backlash. I think it's going to be really, and I think those who've gone employee-led, not employer-led, have done a much better job, because there's some CEOs that kind of go, I'm paying for this building, so I want to have people physically there. Well, we need to reimagine that. And I think there's an ongoing narrative for that. But I also think that from an internal comms point of view, we need to keep working with our employees to understand them and what they need. And I think that's really hard to capture that at one point, because what we felt 6 months ago to today about how we work, where we want to work, how we want to live, is changing all the time. I'm suddenly lonely. I wasn't lonely a while ago. I suddenly actually need connection again. And it's all about building of the design for participation, connection, and conversation. Hybrid working can facilitate it. But if you drive that from a policy decision of whether you're physically in a room or not, because the employer wants to pay for a building, then that's never going to get to the right place. That's not going to engender trust or anything that you want. I think we've got another tough challenge ahead next year. We need to have dialogue, listening, conversation, understanding, and actually really get to below with employee needs. And then we need to pitch that case back to our leaders, rather than just being like, we need to tick a box, because I don't think we'll ever really get to a place that we know what that feels like for quite some time. It's learning and dialogue is the answer.
We're going to bring this to land in about 1 minute. So Kat, I'm going to give the last word to you.
Oh, sorry. And what is
before we bring it into land? So yeah, just on this question, but also generally anything you'd want to sort of sum up in terms of how we look at the future engagement?
So for me, I think, Matt, I guess my conclusion would be anybody that works in the engagement or internal comms space, you are the eyes and ears, you are the glue, you are, you know, if organizations and businesses have become kind of building blocks, you know, kind of items that exist on a balance sheet or on a P&L or on an org chart and so on, you're kind of the interstitial people that exist between all of those building blocks, and you are absolutely pivotal in the future of work. I'm not sure you understand just how important you are, but what you do need to bear in mind is this mass customization, this, you know, that listening, creating dialogue, that's going to be the work. That is going to be the work.
Yeah, fantastic. A great way to end. I'm going to bring Lucy back in, but just as I do, I want to say, Dom, thank you for hosting and leading us through and the content you brought. Kat, Jen, thank you so much for joining us on this final webinar of the year for Impulse. Really, really appreciated your thoughts and the ideas you brought. I think hopefully there's a lot of content there for people to get hold of. So Lucy, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all to the speakers. It was really, really great. Lots of great interaction. So just so everyone knows, I will be sending the recording and the slides on Monday. If you do have any other questions for the panel, please send them over on email and I'll pass them along. But keep an eye out for our webinars starting back in January, and everyone have a great Christmas.
Yes, definitely. Happy Christmas.
Thanks for having us. Happy Christmas.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.